been a long day when stuff like that happens.
Hey, how was your you got to meet an Olympian, right?
I did.
Who was that? I forget.
Usain Bolt.
That's so cool. How was it? Tell us about it.
It was cool. So he's the new brand ambassador for Sprint Ray, which is a 3D printing company, and they're specifically focused in dental. And I guess the reason they got him on was because they built a mobile dental clinic in Jamaica. And so that kind of piqued his interest, and he's, doing a lot on the humanitarian side now. So that was cool because, we had the presentations from all the other doctors, and then he was introduced. And so he came on stage and just sat down, kind of questions were asked. He's a pretty funny guy too. Learned about his twins that he has and
Aw.
all that kind of stuff. And then we took pictures, and then the next day we had a yacht cruise, and he came with us. So that was pretty fun to go on a little 3-4 hour yacht ride with him. So
Wow. How many people were on the yacht with you guys?
it was pretty much everybody they invited. We probably had 150, 200 people.
Oh, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a big boat. Very big boat. But it was fun. Now, what stemmed from that, it sounds like we're going to, all these surgical courses and stuff I go to, we're going to start doing those in Jamaica. So we're going to bring dentists over for their training, and then, treat their patient bases over there and partner with some clinics and, kind of work with him to do more of the humanitarian stuff.
Tommy, do you care if I mute you so
No,
we
go
don't
ahead.
have the background noise? Thanks.
That's fine.
Hey, Erin, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to hear what you have to say. I've been looking forward to this one.
Okay. Are we waiting for many more people?
Yeah, so we'll wait a couple of minutes. We'll chit chat and network probably until about 6:10ish. And then we'll have some announcements and I'll introduce you so you'll know when to start.
Okay, perfect.
Do you have any slides that you want to share?
Yeah, but I can share them now, or I could share my screen when I present.
Later when we get started. I just wasn't sure if you'd used Google Meet before. So the present now button is at the bottom there. If you have any videos, it might be difficult for us to view those, but we'll trial and error with whatever you have.
No, it's just a PowerPoint. So
okay,
no.
Perfect.
Awesome. So what was everybody for Halloween? Or what did y'all do?
I was Post Malone.
I did see that picture. That was cool.
I was the master.
Yeah, Layla's makeup was fire.
I was good. I saw you guys were with Jade.
Pardon my cat.
Yeah, Jade went as a pinata. And Layla did a nice black eye on her.
Oh, nice.
It was fun.
So where were y'all where you were all together? That was what I was curious about.
We were in Tyler. We just all stayed at Jade's apartment. She lives on the square. And it's been so long since I've lived near there. I didn't know that Tyler had so many bars. And the square in Tyler is very lively.
Where on the square? I'm trying to think.
We were at, please.
What? I didn't know there were apartments on the square now.
Yeah, they're right off the square.
Okay. So those are completed. I thought they were still in construction.
They're renovated. She lives in an old bank building, I believe. Like her closet is a safe.
Okay, that's the coolest thing ever.
It's a very cool apartment. And we were in walking distance to all the bars, so that was pretty cool.
Did you guys go to the True Vine in East Texas Brewery? Had like a
something going on that night. Did you guys
We
go to
went
that?
to, my brother went to Truvine before we met up with him, but we went to ETX and we went to Rick's.
Okay.
They were both really great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Rick's is very lively downtown. Oh, sorry, Greg. I think I cut you off.
Oh no, I was muting myself. You're good.
Okay, so I say Rick's on the square is really lively. You know, they have the Andes down there, and they have a Truvine downtown.
Yeah,
And
they had
coffee
live
shop.
music. It was
Yeah.
really nice.
You know, growing up there, things weren't open past 8 o'clock. So
Yeah.
it's kind of nice to
And
have
I'm
all
pretty
that.
sure bars didn't even exist whenever, or maybe I was just a kid. I don't know.
No, you had to go to the other county.
Yeah.
You know, Smith County, or I mean, not Smith. What's the other county? The other county next to it, I can't think of. Henderson County, you know, or something. So
I was a boring adult that hid in the back of my house to make it look like there wasn't anybody home.
Oh,
We
and
turned
they
off all the
dressed
living
up.
room lights, all the front porch lights. Nobody's scared. Don't ring our doorbell.
Oh gosh.
MFA, did you not get any trick-or-treaters, even though you dressed up for them?
Yes, it was really sad. We waited all night, had no one come. We live right down the street from an elementary school, so we don't know where they were. And so my husband felt so bad. He walked the dog to the front door to ring our doorbell so I can give candy.
So you guys got to eat all of your candy.
We shouldn't. We really need to just give it away.
I went as Hamlet, and then on Halloween night, I watched the Cowboys and the Vikings, and then the Astros beat the Braves. So I didn't do anything candy related on Halloween. I just watched sports.
Yeah. Astros again tonight.
Yeah. So
I was in the same boat as MFA. We dressed up and everything and no trick-or-treaters. We got more last year than this year.
The kids are getting smart. They know, let's go to the neighborhood where there's the $2-3 million homes and trick or treat.
Yeah.
They get full candy bars over there.
That's not me.
I saw a lot of advertisements for like events. I think the trunk or treat thing is becoming very popular. And that's what everyone's doing rather than knocking on doors.
That was my theory too. Like we have 2 or 3 just big community events, or churches will have like things that they set up. And then it's like a one-stop shop, and you can just kind of turn the kids loose and not have to watch them as closely.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, in my hometown, Sarah, you're from Mineola, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same. I grew up in Van. It's like the church. It's a big thing if Halloween's on Sunday night because the churches say you can't do that, and the schools say you can't do it. So they move it to a Sunday or a Saturday night or a Wednesday night. So they do the trunk or treats, and then all the homes have to do it. But it's a big thing in these small towns, so that's probably why.
Yep, I dressed up my nieces on Sunday night, and they went downtown Main Street.
Mineola?
Yep.
So trunk or treat is like you just pull your cars up and they come and get candy out of your car?
For Mineola, yes, I think some people do actually have their cars and give out candy, but all the businesses give out candy. So all the businesses on Main Street decorate and dress up and have candy, and they give out candy. And so the kids just walk up and down Main Street to all the businesses.
Okay.
Yeah, and the church that I was going to for a while here, they would kind of close out the parking lot, and people would pull into the parking spaces, and they decorate their cars, and like each spot had like a little theme. So there might be like a football decorated car with like a referee and a football player that were handing out candy, or that it was this whole like competition, almost like a costume contest, only it was like the full theme of your setup, right? So that was a big thing for like the children's programming and stuff.
You just gotta skip the big white van without windows and
I don't think that horror was encouraged in the context.
Oh gosh. Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and kind of get started with the announcements and stuff so we can make sure that we give Erin enough time to talk with us and hear what she has to say. So just a couple things here, starting out with service. Great job, everybody, on the lunch sacks. You're still able to squeak some in. So if you were halfway done and didn't quite finish all that up, finish them up and go ahead and send them in. Fill out your service form and get yourself some credit for that. Couple other things coming up. We've got our very own Greg Sherman riding the Tour de Tucson to end polio here in the next 2-3 weeks, actually. So he is still taking donations there. I believe anything donated also contributes, and correct me if I'm wrong, contributes to your Paul Harris Fellow. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So great opportunity to kind of work towards that Paul Harris Fellow and still, still help support to end polio there. He'll be riding 150 miles. So, give him some support.
Not that much, just 100.
100. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got confused with the MS 150 that we did. So.
Yeah, that extra 50 is a killer, man.
Yeah.
It is. And then, of course, share that on your social media. Emma's been posting that here and there. So when you see it, repost it, encourage your friends as well. Then I was hoping Wes was here because I'm out of the loop 100% on this, but just wanted to mention the DEI board for the district. I believe they're still hosting those meetings. And so if you are wanting to be involved in that diversity, equity, inclusion meeting with our district and that initiative, I don't know the date on that, but we can, or what day of the month,
Yeah, they meet the first Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. So there is a meeting this week. I've got the link and can share it in the chat if you give me just a few seconds.
Perfect. So remember that's something that feel free to be involved in as not just part of our club or our entire district and what's going on there. And then last thing on service, which we'll get into a little bit more on our next meeting, will be we are doing the angel tree for this this quarter, or basically up to Christmas, and we'll make sure we have an email with some of those details. I think some of that's already been sent out once, but we'll be able to talk more and more about that at our next meeting and make sure we have all the details lined out for everybody there. All right. Another really important thing that's coming up is, as most of us have been involved in RILA, we are looking to have a RILA chair for this year. Layla was our chair last year, and she is part of the actual RILA organization as well, and so are some of the other members of our club. So we'd really love to have somebody, take on that role and kind of head it up. We have several people who are willing to support that. I want to give Layla a second just to kind of talk about what that role looks like, expectations, and kind of, what that role does.
Thanks. So the role itself is pretty simple. You get emails from me and from Cookie, and you will, the most time-consuming thing really is doing the interviews. And so you will have a committee, and within that committee, you will then contact the homeschool area, like directors in our area, and then they'll send in the applications, and you'll go from there with the interview process. And then you and your committee or yourself can pick who you want our RILA campers to be. We have signed up for 3 campers. Is that right? That's what we decided. 3 to host 3 this year from hopefully we'll have that many apply, especially since it's kind of last minute. We have until December to get all of those kids registered, but you're talking to the person who does the registering, so we have a little bit longer. But yeah, so it's really not super time consuming, and I'm always here if you have any questions. I'll probably still help out, like be on the committee. So do think about being on our RILA chair.
Yeah, that would be great. And like Layla said, you're not doing it on your own. You'll have guidance. So even if you think I have no idea what that position does, there are several people even just on this call that were involved in those interviews and everything else last year. So plenty of support there, but we really do need somebody to step up and help with that. Now on the programs kind of stuff, Sarah's done amazing getting awesome speakers, but everybody please keep in mind, if we can help her out by talking to people we know who kind of, they might have some topics to talk about that kind of align with the main focus of our club, or even if you think they're just a good speaker, but you're not sure what topic they have, let's chat with them and look at, I think for the rest of the year, we're pretty much solid. But come January, February, March, we're looking to fill those slots, and Sarah is always wanting to get those things locked in ahead of time so that the speakers have plenty of time to prepare and kind of tailor, whatever their talk is to our club and know more about what we do as well. So just a reminder on that. So if y'all were with us last year, you knew that we did a kind of a Secret Santa name draw thing. That's another thing that we'll be talking about on the next meeting and kind of pushing that into motion. It's not a required thing. It is voluntary, but it is definitely more fun when we get, a few more people involved. Last year, it was great when, we were able to have our meeting after everybody got their gifts and we opened them up and had a good time just kind of on that social meeting. So I just want to throw that out there. We'll be talking more about that at our meeting in 2 weeks to kind of put that in motion. So talking about our meeting in 2 weeks, or our next meeting, we will not have a speaker. It will be more of one of our open networking type of meetings. We really want to focus this next meeting, a good portion of it, on talking about our service initiatives for 2022. Particularly, like we've kind of teased and mentioned here, that we want to put together a little bit bigger project that we can kind of align with an organization to support and help us also be able to grow as a club, to be able to host bigger and bigger kind of events and contribute more to organizations in the future. So we want to just, think on that. If there's something you're passionate about, an organization you're involved in, when we meet next week, tell us about it. Or if you have ideas on who we can align with, to support moving forward, that would be awesome. So just wanted to mention that. That's pretty much everything there. And then, so November, we do have 5 Tuesdays. So typically we have our first and third meeting, or first and third week of the month are our meetings. We give you the second and fourth off. But when we have a fifth one, we want to kind of add another networking event that will be a little bit fun. I think Elizabeth is kind of going to be heading this up. So Elizabeth, do you have anything you want to say about your plans for that?
Yeah, so in chatting with the group, chatting with the board rather, it sounded like there was some interest in having some sort of bourbon or whiskey tasting. I would love to mail you all bourbon or whiskey, but that gets a little bit complicated, particularly when we start talking about crossing state lines. So it's going to be a BYO bourbon, whiskey, wine, beer, water, coffee, whatever you want to bring. And a little pub trivia action. So that's the plan. I've already had Madeline volunteer to be quizmaster, so it will be entertaining, if nothing else. So encourage you all to come, and I'll get more information on time and platform and all of that in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. And then I think that pretty much wraps it up. Sarah Tucker, if you want to introduce Erin, and we'll get started there.
Yes. Stand by. Let me pull up her bio. All right. So I'm really excited. I've met Erin once, and if you guys remember our very first guest speaker, Danny Brott, who talked to us about high performance habits. Erin's a good friend of Danny's, and that's how I know her. And he is part of who connected me with her. So, Erin is a communication specialist focusing on marine topics such as small scale fisheries, marine protected areas, and the blue economy. Previously working as a photojournalist for 5 years, Erin gradually found her way into the world of policy, which led her to pursue a master's in international relations and cultural diplomacy in Berlin. Her passion is ocean conservation and protecting marine biodiversity. All right. So, Erin, that's all I have. Please take it away.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just wanted to mention before, I was also a member of Rotary when I was younger. Rotary gave me the opportunity to go abroad the first time when I was in high school. So excited to share stuff with you guys today, and let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm gonna try to be a little bit interactive, and if I'm just really heavy on the facts, we can bring it back towards a more storytelling and then go over questions at the end. But hopefully I can give you some sort of content that will be new for you that you can learn today. So I'm gonna share my screen. Let me know when you see it.
I can see it now.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, so thank you for joining me. I'm going to be talking about addressing geopolitics and marine conservation with a higher focus on marine conservation and the different challenges that are being experienced with a certain sea that I'm going to reveal. And then we're going to talk about just different issues with geopolitics, how it works, and how it affects conservation efforts. So before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about me. I was a Rotary Exchange student, and in 2010, about 10 years ago, I got to go to Rio de Janeiro, and I was there for a year. So this was a picture of my district. So that's why I'm really happy to be here with you guys today. I graduated with my bachelor in business, and just recently graduated with my master's in cultural diplomacy and international relations, just like Sarah just said. And right now I'm in Berlin, so I'm joining you guys. And then I got into marine policy in my master's, so I started to focus my thesis on communication strategies, the upscale commitment for marine protected areas, in a policy that's called the Nationally Determined Contributions, which refer to the amount of emissions that each country emits with their carbon emissions. And every 4 years, they have to turn one in to try to reach goals of the Paris Agreement to try to become net zero carbon neutral before 2050. So right now, what I'm working on, I do a lot of communications work for initiatives in fisheries management and the blue economy, like Sarah said. But I wanted to do an icebreaker first and just try to get you guys your knowledge on the oceans. And I wanted to ask if anybody just wanted to give ask a few questions and see, what is your standing? So I wanted to ask, does anybody have an idea about which ocean has the highest amount of endemic species? And endemic species have to do with species that occur only in a certain area. So like an area like the Galapagos Islands, when it has species that are extremely unique to the area. Would anybody have an idea which ocean tends to have the highest amount?
Would it be the Arctic Ocean?
No, unfortunately.
Indian Ocean?
No, but close.
Then it would be
Red-
this Pacific, because that's the biggest.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trick question because, the Pacific Ocean, but mostly in the areas that regard small island states. So, right off the coast of Australia, and a lot of different islands in Polynesia, Hawaii, and the Galapagos. These are all residing in the Pacific Ocean, which means the highest amount of different endemic species just based on the different islands that are there. Okay, so anybody know what ocean experiences the heaviest maritime traffic?
Pacific?
The Atlantic?
The Atlantic is one of them. It was already mentioned in the first question. I can give you a hint. It's
The Indian Ocean?
yes. So this constantly changes, right, with different economic activities, especially with COVID last year. But right now, the ocean that experiences the heaviest maritime traffic is the Indian Ocean right now. And does anybody have an idea with global water temperature rise, which sea is experiencing the fastest rate of temperature rise?
Is it the Arctic?
No, it's not actually, but that's a really good guess. It's
Atlantic?
no, it's a smaller one. So it is the Mediterranean.
Mediterranean?
Yep,
Yeah.
it's the Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean is going to be kind of my topic of discussion, just to really get into a niche. So I wanted to just give you a brief overview and why it's important and why I wanted to talk about it. So it is one of the areas most vulnerable to global climate changes and temperature rises, but it's also the second largest global biodiversity hotspot after the Amazon. So what does that mean? That means there's a lot of endemic species or species unique that are not found in any other part of the world that are actually in the Mediterranean basin. So just to give an idea, they host 28% of the world's endemic species. And even though this is one of the smallest oceans or seas that there is, it compromises 20% of the world's gross marine product. So it is one of the most economically important oceans. And this has to do with the fact that the Mediterranean is the #1 tourist destination in the world. They receive over 200 million tourists per year. And they have about 150 million people on the coast living there all year round. But despite this, yes, it's a semi-enclosed area that's really important for activities such as wintering, reproduction, and different migrations. But in terms of how much the ocean is actually protected, only 1.25% of the Mediterranean is highly protected. And what does it mean when something says that it's highly protected? When it comes to different protected areas, there's different regulations and standards. So I will dive into a little bit of what highly protected means later on, but just to give you an idea, very little of the Mediterranean is actually protected today. And I wanted to talk about it because it is a sea under increasing pressure. So before we go into the geopolitics, I wanted to explain, what is marine conservation mean in the Mediterranean? What are the topics that are trying to be addressed? Well, one of them is, the constant temperature rise, which is happening more than other parts of the world. This is, again, because it is a semi-enclosed area, but that also makes it really vulnerable to different land policies and actions that happen within the basin. So for example, unsynchronized land policies that deal with different pollution or waste treatment or agricultural chemicals that are leaked into rivers, it's more difficult for the Mediterranean Sea to disperse of this, right? And because it's such a highly endemic area, a lot of endemic species are being harmed. And in turn, that can create an increase in invasive species. So if anybody has heard of, just a species in your area, this is happening in the Mediterranean, like certain jellyfish that are coming and taking over habitats, invading with the food chain, and yeah, just leads to habitat deterioration. And more than anything, the Mediterranean it's a small area that is very water sensitive. So there's not a whole lot of fresh water. And with the surges in mass tourism that happens, it leads on, pressures on water, sewage treatment, leading to fishing demands that can bring overfishing, increasing coastal development. And yeah, this obviously makes it an environmentally vulnerable place. So this is kind of the ideas of the main ideas with conservation in the Mediterranean Sea. It has to do with restoring the balance of biodiversity, reducing invasive species, and trying to have anthropogenic or human activity adapt in ways so that the ocean is not being harmed. So why do I want to talk about geopolitics in the Mediterranean Sea and what that actually means? So I try to give you guys a photo here that explains, there's 8 subregions or subseas in the Mediterranean, and basically it encloses 3 different regions, right? You have Southern Europe, you have the Middle East, and North Africa. All the maritime activity, economic or conservation, it's all dependent on how these nations collaborate with each other. So that can lead to a lot of conflict. And if you're familiar with history, you will know that, there's a lot of geological or territorial disputes in certain areas. And so this is still an issue, a conflict that people are facing today. So I'm going to go into the biological diversity in the Mediterranean. So a lot of people, when they think of it, maybe you're pitching like the coast of Italy or something, because it is so popular with its tourism demand. But a lot of people don't realize that with the small ocean, most people don't assume that large species live there, like whales or sharks or this kind of thing. So I wanted to do a pop quiz. True or false? Can you find the great white shark in the Mediterranean?
False.
It's actually true. Why they're
And
not?
that's why I did not swim when I was in Italy.
Why they are not that as common as found in other areas, they are found in the Mediterranean. And there's also different illegal fishing activity where shark fins can be found in different markets. So there's about 17,000 identified species in the Mediterranean, and again, 28% of which is endemic. You have 47 different shark species, 33 ray species, 23 cetaceans, which are whales, dolphins, porpoises, 3 species of sea turtles, 2 of which lay their eggs in the Mediterranean, and 1 of which is just migratory, and then 1 seal, which is highly endangered. To give you a comparison, the Gulf of Mexico has about 15,000 identified species. So actually for the small area that it encompasses, it's really high in its biological diversity. I just wanted to give a few graphs because I get really excited when talking about this, but before I get carried away, because I can get a bit crazy, I want to go back to the geopolitics affecting marine conservation. So what does this mean in international waters? It's when people are arguing over a common resource or something that doesn't have strict regulations on how it's managed. So geopolitics have to do with the study of the effects on Earth's geography on politics. And so different nations trying to argue over a common pool resource. And it basically comes down to that. And in marine conservation, a really big topic with this is areas beyond national jurisdiction. So this is otherwise known as the high seas or deep sea areas that are kind of no man's land. So what are areas beyond national jurisdiction? Well, that was applied in policy in 1982 with the United Nations. They created a convention on the law of the sea. But basically, yeah, they're known as high seas. This graph right here can show you, so everything that is in light blue is what is an area beyond national jurisdiction. So every nation has about 200 nautical miles of an exclusive economic zone, which means they can exploit or explore different marine resources for fisheries, for energy, for whatever they want. And then with the high seas, there is a joint jurisdiction, but there is very little framework and even less agreement with different countries on how this area is to be shared. And then another fact about areas beyond deep seas is less than 1% of the global high seas are protected. Even though they are one of the most important, they host some of the most important habitats. So why do they, what is important about areas beyond national jurisdiction? One of the reasons is it includes deep sea or benthic ecosystems. So benthic ecosystems is the seafloor, is the very lowest ecosystem that you probably see on National Geographic when everybody is trying to dive. And these areas can be home to different structure mounts called sea mounts, for example, and sea mounts affect everything that has to do with the flow of the nutrients in the ocean, to creating the base of the micronutrients that are used in the food chain, to different tides and currents. And a lot of nutrients and fish travel with these currents. So their deep sea organisms are pretty essential to the whole being and the flow of how things are. It also is a refuge to highly migratory species that are endangered or threatened. So let's say, for example, high seas could host refuge to certain species like a tuna that is being overfished, and then maybe it's the off season. So the high seas would be something that would still be very rich in this resource. And sometimes there's moments of, vulnerable overfishing or irregular, unregulated, or unregular fishing, which is IUU fishing. And another issue with in the Mediterranean tends to be disputes on areas where to develop renewable energy or even natural gas reserves. So the Eastern Mediterranean is really high in natural gas reserves, and also the Mediterranean is one of the areas that is most developed for its wave energy. So they're trying to develop methods of renewable energy, but to do this, you also have to enter a market with the rest of the maritime force, and this requires a lot of land. And this could either enter into conflict with, other nations or harm an ecosystem. So just true or false again, do trees provide more oxygen than the ocean? Anyone know?
No, false.
Good answer. It's
Yes,
false.
got one.
Yeah, actually, I think most people, when they think of, oxygen that we breathe and everything, we always reference a tree. And trees are extremely important because they do provide a lot of oxygen, but actually the major source of oxygen that we breathe comes from the ocean, and it comes from, the ocean is a carbon sink within itself, meaning it absorbs a lot of carbon monoxide, but also because of a lot of the sea or plant species that are in the ocean. So this has like phytoplankton or sea kelp forests or sea grasses. So if you see seaweed, or if you ever hear somebody that's very excited about seaweed, they're probably an amazing person, because these are major carbon sinks, and that provides the majority of the oxygen that we breathe. And the high seas actually hosts 2/3 of this oxygen. So the high seas are really important to, their health is important to affecting us and what we do, what we breathe. So geopolitics in the Mediterranean, I wanted to just bring up 3 areas of importance. Two of which I can talk about in a little bit more detail, and the third that I'm gonna try to go over lightly. But I wanted to talk about marine protected areas and fisheries. These are 2 really important issues with conservation that are also revolved around geopolitics. And energy development, gas reserves. I'll try to go over that briefly, but as it's not my area to go into energy, I don't wanna discuss it too much. But yeah, basically this image here is of maritime jurisdictions in the Mediterranean Sea. So to give you an idea, what's on light blue, these are considered fishing zones. And the high seas are these areas beyond national jurisdiction that I just mentioned. These are everything that is highlighted in red. And territorial seas are the exclusive economic zones that are this little blue line that aligns the entire coast. And then you have tons of other jurisdictions, like territorial seas, inland waters. But the most important part is to understand, the territorial seas and the high seas. So, marine protected areas. Hopefully, you guys are okay with maps, as it's okay with kind of dealing with geopolitics. But MPAs, or marine protected areas, they're clearly defined geographical space recognized and managed by legal or other effective means to achieve long-term conservation in nature. So basically, they have to be in agreement with a nation or between nations to reside or protect. And again, there's different levels of protected areas. So for example, you can have a protected area, but maybe fishing or recreational fishing or even industrial fishing is still permitted. So there's about 9 different levels of protection, and they all have their separate names. But only about 1.25% is highly protected. So this image right here shows the amount of MPAs that are in the Mediterranean. And one of the issues with this conservation measure is most of them are coastal or located in waters less than 50 meters deep. So again, the areas beyond national jurisdiction, they're not being protected, even though they host some of the more important ecosystems. For example, to maintain carbon absorption, etc., or essential ecosystems. But yeah, I just wanted to list off some of their benefits, because their benefits in the long term they're essential to everything. So they impact the economy, they impact the fishing stocks. So they're used to increase fish stocks in areas that are overfished and vulnerable species, but they also are really important to aiding coastal zone degradation. So they help buffer different coastal areas from storms, reducing disaster risk. And they sustain a lot of the attributes that the economy is dependent on, because one of the reasons the Mediterranean is so sought after in the tourism is for its sun and sea activities. And then this image below shows different areas that should be protected. So other sites of interest for conservation. So you can see what is actually being covered and the areas that are of immediate interest. There's a lot of space that still needs to happen. But one example of something that was successful with Geopolitics was an agreement between 3 different countries, and it's called the Pelago Sanctuary. So it was an agreement between Monaco, France, and Italy to protect an area, about 87,500 square kilometers, to protect especially cetaceans and different whales, because this is a high migratory route within this Strait of Italy. So this is an example of a well-protected area, but for the majority of the marine protected areas that you can see, most of them belong to certain national jurisdictions. So for example, you'll see the majority of MPAs along the upper coast because it's funded by the EU. And one of the issues that you face with establishing marine protected areas is they cost money. They cost money to monitor, to pay staff, to make sure that people are not fishing in the areas that they should be, and to pay scientists, to do research. So a lot of the unequal distribution has to do, with different countries and what are their priorities, and funding, essentially. So the EU distributes a lot of funds towards that. So that's why you see a lot of green and a lot of marine protected areas in the European coast. Another issue is fisheries. And so fisheries, I think most of us understand how they work. It's chasing a lot of the resources. So management for fisheries also has to deal with dealing with a lot of different laws in nations. So you have different areas that will ban fishing for a certain period of time, or bans the capture of certain species, etc. But if other nations are overfishing that resource, then people will look for another species or another product that they can use. So the idea is a popular approach to fishing is an ecosystem approach. So evaluating the state of the ecosystems for the fisheries. So deciding when fish are in their mating season or their reproduction season. That's usually the time when you don't fish. But the fisheries are local. And they're a source of nutrition, trade, and income in a lot of developing and developed coastal nations. So it is an essential food source. And what happens is if some nations overfish a certain resource, it might lead other nations to compete or either, raise up their amount of fishing and try to also deplete this resource, or it can lead to cases of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing with other resources. So maybe somebody is fishing tuna and it's becoming overfished. And one nation decides that they're going to, use larger industrial trawls to capture more, and then another country cannot compete. Maybe they will go towards eating or harvesting more endangered species to maintain this source of income in their countries and nutrition. And I think it goes out without saying, but the overfishing, some of the consequences are, you deplete a lot of the food chain. So this can also affect the larger species, affecting the migratory routes and causing a collapse, And so what is a solution for fisheries? One of the solutions is just working with a regional approach of scientists and agreements. But a lot of it has to do with getting different companies, or not companies, but getting different nations to come to a common agreement on the measures that they should take. And then I wanted to just talk really quickly about territory disputes in the Mediterranean. So there's also natural gas. This area, this is not an area that I focus on, but I just wanted to highlight that. So because the Mediterranean is such a historically rich place, it's also very rich in territorial disputes and areas of conflict. And so, for example, you have Cyprus, which is divided between northern Cyprus and southern. You have a lot of different territorial conflicts. So, but it's also an area that is also really rich in natural gas reserves. So this includes higher geopolitics and conflicts between countries. So I thought these graphs really describe that very well. But again, this also happens in the Eastern Mediterranean when you are talking about establishing marine protected areas. Maybe it won't be recognized or acknowledged by certain countries because in their mind, that land belongs to them. So this is also an issue that you have with conservation, because you cannot conserve what nobody acknowledges to be a certain area, to be a jurisdiction. So yeah, this kind of highlights a little bit of the different natural gas fields, and then what is in larger EEZs, or exclusive economic zones, that we talked about. And Cyprus, for example, as it has these few gas reserves, and you have the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and then you have Lower Cyprus, and they have arguments of who has the activities or the access to these reserves in the water. So yeah, this summarizes a little bit about the geopolitics and the arguing that nations have over different territories. But mostly what I wanted to put emphasis on was the fishing management and the MPAs. But it's also the similar situation. If people try to block different zones, disputes between territories will say, this is not your economic zone, this is mine, so I can fish on it and do my season or whatever. And the same thing is with establishing marine protected areas. And if nations cannot agree on what standards can be done, you cannot really conserve the area, right? So what is the solution? Well, the solution is difficult. If I knew all the answers, I would be at the UN. But it basically comes around international agreements and leaders. So trying to have more of a horizontal approach and not just a top-down approach of governments deciding what happens, but also, you know, having scientific committees that give science-based information about, you know, the actions that should be taken for different protected areas or for reviving fishery stocks. So this is one of the things. It's just lowering or evening out the playing field of different actors. So a multi-stakeholder approach. So yeah, I hope it was easy to understand, and that's the gist of my presentation. But let me know if you guys have any questions, and yeah, very excited to hear what you might have to say. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, first of all, thanks for sharing. I have to admit, this is an area that I know pretty much next to nothing about. So this was really informative. And I appreciate kind of broadening my horizons a little bit. One of the things that I know is true just about that part of the world, particularly when you get into the eastern part of the Mediterranean, there is a lot of disparity and conflict, and a lot of that goes far beyond any kind of coastal lines into a lot of other issues as well. I'm wondering the extent to which any of that collaboration is happening right now. I know you said that it's challenging, but is that a conversation that's happening, particularly as we think about like the Middle Eastern states and North Africa and some of the areas where there is a lot more conflict than there is in, say, the EU?
It is happening. So one example I can give is the Paris Agreement. So that was, you know, signed by most states. And one of the measures that they do is something called nationally determined contributions. So each country has to state that there's carbon emission or their carbon emission goal or the amount that they want to reduce their carbon emissions. So an example of that is you had different countries that did not ratify the Paris Agreement. For example, Turkey did not ratify, so they don't have any nationally determined contributions. But for most of the Middle Eastern states and areas in the Mediterranean, you do. For example, Syria also just entered and described their nationally determined contributions, I think in 2019, even though the agreement was signed in 2015. So you do have people that are still joining at capacity what they can do. I would say one of the challenges is the idea that when you have a policy that asks different countries to show their carbon emissions and how to reduce them, maintaining this kind of trend of trying to lower the carbon emissions. It might not happen for other countries. For example, COVID this past year really pushed everything up from the side. So most of the second nationally determined contributions, they were supposed to be submitted for last year. And I think only 4 Mediterranean countries had submitted theirs. So I think one of the issues that you have is consistency with certain countries, and that all comes down to capacity. And the EU, yeah, they submit all of their policies and nationally determined contributions together. So it really doesn't come down to the different southern Mediterranean countries. They're just really linked together, so they don't have any accountability for that. But it is a bit more difficult. 2 of the countries that do not participate, I believe, are Libya and Turkey within the Paris Agreement, but all the other states do.
Well, and that's interesting about Libya too, because if I remember looking at your map correctly, that whole northern coast of Libya was part of the area that you were saying really needed some extra protection, and for them not to participate, kind of hard to see how that would actually play itself out then.
Yeah, Libya did not ratify the Paris Agreement, if I'm correct. Don't quote me. But yeah, there's a lot of distributes in Northern Africa. But for example, yeah, there's a lot of really important marine ecosystems that are in the south. or in the northern African waters, not just the southern European. But sometimes the measures have to do with maybe that they do want to protect the areas, but it's just lack of funding, or maybe that, you know, they have only a certain amount of areas and, you know, a fishing industry that they have to support, or artisanal fishers. So one of the issues is different nations dealing with certain fleets. So when people think of overfishing, they just think of these giant, you know, trawlers that you see on Netflix or something, but sometimes they're, you know, with a lot of smaller developing nations, it's really just smaller people bringing in limited amounts. So there might be reasons for this, why they don't impose these kind of issues within their exclusive economic zones. But for example, you have the EU, it has a lot more maritime activity, a lot larger capacity. So that is also why they're a little bit more strict.
For that area that you said was completely protected, I forget what you called it. Is there, sorry, say that again?
It's the Pelagos Sanctuary.
Yes, the sanctuary. Has there been, or are there studies that have shown how that area has gotten better over time from when it began as being protected, and how successful, I guess, is protecting that area?
Yeah. So I believe the area became protected in the 1980s, so it wasn't with any recent legislation. Most studies with protected areas they have kind of a 5x5 rule. You need, I think, over 10 years, 10 over 100 square kilometers each way. So you need a large area and you need a large time to make the difference. So there are studies on the Pelagos Sanctuary and how it's improved. And then there's also violations, right? Because Italy is also an area that's really high in tourism. So you will also encounter like cruises that are going through the area, especially during a migratory season. So the Pelagos Sanctuary is not a no man's land. So it doesn't mean that it's illegal to sail in it. It's not like you can't step foot, nobody can swim here. It's just so certain measures are placed for fishing, certain measures are placed for you know, cargo and maritime ships that ship their cargo, so then they have a port somewhere else. That's the main idea of the protection of the Pelagos Sanctuary. But it's not one of the highest protected areas, if that makes sense. Most highly protected areas are really small areas, basically dedicated to science, because the Mediterranean is so high in tourism. So there's not a whole lot of areas that they can allocate to just no access, and, you know, especially if it's a pristine area. But yeah, studies with high protected areas, they do have really large amounts of improving tourism within the area, because then the other surrounding marine habitats also tend to revive based on this protected area. You have increased species because you have a safe zone where for nesting and for migratory routes for different mammals. So you have increased biodiversity. But one of the issues is they're not taking up enough space. So what a lot of experts say, and I agree with it, is with protected areas, it would be better to have a few highly protected areas than a ton of semi-protected areas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I just want to second what Elizabeth said. This was really great, and I feel like we haven't had a meeting like this where I feel like we learned so much about an issue that is so large. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. I hope that I tried to really crunch it down into a few things, but yeah,
you made it very understandable.
Amazing. Glad to hear it.
At the same time, I could tell the depth of what you do, though, because I was like, oh, wow, this is like, I feel like this is probably something you could talk for 5 hours about, and we would still just have a tiny piece of information.
Yeah.
So, but it was really, really awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And we're always open to new members too. So I'm not sure if you're part of a Rotary Club. One thing that's awesome about our group is that we meet this way. So it doesn't matter where you're at. So you're always welcome anytime you want to join in. The link's pretty much the same every time that you got today. So, thank you so much for today, and we hope to see you more in the future as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll try. It's a bit late for me to meet at this time, but it also sounds like you guys are extremely involved. And yeah,
Sure.
like I said before, Rotary gave me some of the best experiences, and I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been with Rotary so many years ago. So
We love to hear it.
That's
Yeah.
good. I have a quick question. I know we're ending. So you said you're in Berlin or Munich. Is that a hot spot for what you're doing? I can't think of what it is, but
yeah, it's a hotspot for policy. I'm in Berlin, so it's the capital of Germany. I came for my studies. Actually, I work remotely, so I work with a U.S. company with fisheries, and I work with the Mediterranean region. But it is a hotspot for a lot of startups and policy. But I would say, for most of the EU, policies are dealt with in Brussels. And then you have different UN offices in parts of Europe. So one would be Rome. Rome is a really big spot for everything that's happening within the Mediterranean. So all the fisheries in the Mediterranean are dealt with in Rome. You also have one city that's Malaga, which is the south of Spain. So they do try to disperse a lot of the power. So not all entities are in one area, but anything that has to do with EU policy, it's pretty much based in Brussels. Berlin is very central to anything that happens in Germany. All of the big German branches of any NGO is here. So there is some policy, and there are some water policy experts, but I would not say it's the hotspot. I would say Rome is the main area, the focal point of what's happening in the Mediterranean. But I am also here just until I can move back to the coast. So I'm kind of missing the beach right now. So yeah, let's see what happens. Hopefully I can move soon. But it's a great place to be. If you guys ever want to visit, feel free to reach out. I can give you plenty of recommendations, and I do recommend visiting Berlin or Germany. It's a great place.
Thanks, Erin.
Awesome. Thank you. So we'll wrap up as we normally do. I did put down in the chat the 4-way test. So if y'all want to come off mute, and we'll go ahead and give this another attempt. All right. The 4-way test is things we think, say, and do. Number 1.
Is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Number 2.
Is it fair?
Is it fair
to
to
all
all
concerned?
Number 3.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
And number 4.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Erin, for joining us. We will be back in 2 weeks for a nice little networking and planning meeting for service going forward. So hope to see you all then. Feel free to always invite anybody you want to invite, because we're always looking to build our membership and tell more people about what we do. So thank you guys for everything. I'll hang out for a couple minutes, but y'all are free to go. Have a great evening.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye.